Understanding pass-through authentication. So those organizations who do not want their user account's password to get synchronized in the Azure cloud, so the pass-through authentication is the feature from Azure which allows Azure AD to authenticate the user account using the on-premises Active Directory. So still, you have to synchronize your user accounts from on-premises Active Directory to the Azure Active Directory, but the password will remain on-premises. So when the user will access any O365 enabled applications using web browser or using any FAT client like Outlook, so the pass-through authentication can support these scenarios. So let's understand PTA through this example where a user tried to access the Outlook web app using the web browser. Now, as the Outlook web app is O365 enabled application, so the user get redirected to the Azure AD for sign-in. Azure AD will present the credential dialog box where user has to enter his username and password. Now, the Active Directory has the user's password, but it cannot authenticate the user account because the Azure AD itself do not store the user account passwords. So it has to forward that password to the on-premises, and for that it encrypts the password using the public key of the Azure AD authentication agent which you have installed on premises. So once the password is encrypted, Azure AD will place this request in the queue from where the authentication agent which is running in on-premises server will pick the request from the queue and it will decrypt the password using its own private key. Then it will validate the username and password against the on-premises Active Directory. So once on-premises Active Directory validates the user account, so it will send back the response to the authentication agent. So the response could be the success or failure, or the password is expired, or the account is logged out. So all these status will be returned back to the authentication agent from Active Directory. Then the authentication agent will return this status back to the Azure Active Directory. Azure Active Directory will then return this status back to the user account. So if the user is successfully authenticated, the user will be able to access the web app. So this is how the PTA works. So the benefit of pass-through authentication are like the great user experience. So your user will be having a very good user experience because they don't have to remember two sets of credentials while accessing the on-premises application as well as the O365 enabled applications. Also, the pass-through authentication supports single sign-on, so your user, when they are in the corporate network, so they can access the application in the corporate network as well as the application which are in the cloud using the same credential. So they don't have to type in the credential because it will be picked up from their own workstation when they are logged in using their domain credentials. Easy to deploy. So the pass-through authentication doesn't require any complex setup like the ADFS does. It just requires an agent which is a lightweight agent that has to be installed on a Windows server, and you have to make sure that the Windows server should be having a very good connectivity with the domain controllers. It's secure because your password is safe in your on-premises Active Directory. It's not traveling to the cloud. And you can make your agent highly available, like you can install more than one agent on more than one servers. So if one server where the agent is installed is unavailable, so the other agent running on other server can serve the purpose. Works well with the conditional access feature like MFA. So it is still supporting the conditional access of the Azure AD, but as I told you before that you have to sync your user accounts from on-premises to the Azure AD to use the pass-through authentication. So the conditional access can still be applied on the user accounts and they can have the MFA enabled. And at last, it's a free feature from Azure, so you don't need any paid addition of Azure AD to leverage this feature. So in the next lecture, let's see how we can migrate from our ADFS to pass-through authentication.